The air inside Walmart was colder than usual. Rachel barely noticed as she walked through the automatic doors, pushing her cart forward, her thoughts still wrapped around her long day at work. The artificial brightness of the overhead lights felt too harsh, and for a moment, she had to squint against the sudden glare. She sighed, adjusting the strap of her purse. She wasn't even supposed to be here this late. Originally, she'd planned to grab groceries earlier in the afternoon, but a last-minute email had kept her stuck at the office longer than expected. By the time she finally got out, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting a grayish-orange glow over the parking lot. Now, at nearly 9 p.m., the store was oddly quiet. There were customers, but not many. Mostly a few older women browsing the clothing section and a couple of teenagers messing around near the toy aisle. The usual chaotic hum of Walmart was missing. No screaming kids. No long lines at checkout. Just a quiet, almost eerie stillness. Rachel tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. She was just tired, that was all. She pushed forward, weaving her way into the produce section. Bananas, blueberries, some spinach. Get in, get out, go home. But then, she felt it. That strange, creeping sensation of being watched. It started subtle, just an itch at the back of her neck, that sudden awareness that someone's eyes were on her. At first, she ignored it, moving toward the dairy aisle and reaching for a carton of oat milk. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it got stronger. She swallowed, her grip tightening around the carton as she glanced up, pretending to look at the prices, but really scanning the aisle around her. And that's when she saw him, a man, standing a few feet away, staring. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. He was just standing there, not moving, not pretending to look at anything, just watching her. He looked ordinary. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Slightly unkempt brown hair, a scruffy beard. His face had that weathered, sun-beaten look, like someone who worked construction or spent long hours outdoors. He wore a faded orange t-shirt, loose at the sleeves, paired with dirty jeans and worn-out brown boots. The kind of guy you'd pass on the street and never give a second thought. But something about the way he was staring at her, it wasn't normal. Rachel forced herself to move. She turned back toward her cart and started walking, her heartbeat suddenly too loud in her ears. Maybe he was just looking around. Maybe he wasn't actually staring at her. She turned down the next aisle, and then, out of the corner of her eye, movement. She saw him again. This time, he wasn't standing still. He was following her. Rachel's stomach twisted. Nope, no way. She was just being paranoid. She slowed her steps, deliberately stopping near the granola bars to see if he'd keep walking. He didn't. He stopped too, just a few feet away. Rachel's breath hitched. Her fingers curled around the handle of her cart. She refused to look at him again, pretending to be completely engrossed in picking a box of Kind bars. And then, from the side of her vision, she saw him move closer. Too close. And then, he spoke. Hey there. Rachel's pulse spiked. She turned, forcing a polite smile. Hi. Her voice was calm. Normal. Act normal. The man tilted his head slightly. His eyes didn't match his expression. His lips were curved into something that could technically be called a smile, but his eyes? His eyes were dead, like he was rehearsing emotions he didn't actually feel. He glanced at her cart, then back at her. Shopping alone? He asked. Rachel felt something icy crawl up her spine. She swallowed. Lie. No, she said smoothly. My fiancé is in the car. She made sure to say it casually, like it was the truth. The man's smile didn't drop. If anything, it grew wider. Huh, he said, voice light. I didn't see anyone with you when you came in. Rachel's blood turned to ice. He had been watching her that long? She forced another smile. Oh, he just dropped me off. The man just stood there for a beat too long. Then, finally, he nodded. Ah, that's nice. And with that, he turned and walked away. Rachel exhaled sharply, gripping her cart so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her brain screamed at her to leave right now. But then, a thought crept in. If I leave, will he follow me into the parking lot? She bit her lip. She had to be smart about this. Rachel straightened her shoulders, forced herself to breathe. Finish shopping. Pay. Walk out with other people. Stay aware. She shook her head, trying to regain control of her thoughts. It was fine. Everything was fine. 15 minutes later, Rachel was at self-checkout, scanning the last of her items, feeling a little more at ease. Until she glanced up and saw him again. This time, he was standing at the front of the store, near the sliding doors. Not buying anything. Not talking to anyone. Just watching her. Rachel's stomach dropped. She forced herself to focus, moving as quickly as she could, swiping her card with shaking fingers. The machine beeped. She grabbed her bags, her mind racing. Her car was parked far from the entrance. She needed to get to it fast. Rachel took a deep breath and stepped forward, forcing herself not to run. The moment she walked past the registers, she saw him shift. He was moving too. Rachel stepped outside. The warm night air hit her like a wave. She walked quickly, her breath coming fast, her fingers gripping her car keys so tightly they dug into her palm. Then, as she approached her car, she saw it. A brown pickup truck, parked just a few rows away. The engine was running, and sitting inside, in the driver's seat, him. Rachel froze. Her mouth went dry. He was waiting for her. Rachel's breath hitched the second she saw the brown pickup truck. It was sitting there, idling quietly, 3 rows away from her car. The engine hummed, a low and steady purr, blending into the distant sounds of the Walmart parking lot. The occasional slam of a car door, the muffled voices of customers heading home, the faint beeping of a cart return. But this was different. The moment she stepped into the open air, she felt it again. That awful, stomach-churning sensation of being watched. It crawled up the back of her neck, a creeping, invisible thing, making every nerve in her body stand on edge. She swallowed, tightening her grip on her grocery bags, and forced herself to keep walking. Don't react. Don't make it obvious. The fluorescent Walmart lights cast an unnatural glow over the asphalt, stretching long, distorted shadows beneath her feet. She was almost to her car. Just a few more steps. And then, the driver's door of the truck creaked open. Rachel's pulse spiked. She didn't stop, didn't turn her head. She just kept walking, forcing her legs to move, though they suddenly felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. Footsteps. Behind her. Slow. Measured. Close. The kind of steps that weren't rushed, weren't the casual shuffle of a distracted shopper, but deliberate, like someone was choosing their pace. Rachel's heart pounded so hard, she thought it might bruise her ribs. She reached her car, her fingers scrambling to pull the keys from her purse. They slipped. The metal jingled against the pavement. A sharp breath lodged in her throat. Shit. 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 She crouched down to grab them, but as she did, her eyes flicked up, catching a glimpse of movement in her side mirror. And for the first time, she saw him clearly. The man from the aisle. The one in the orange t-shirt and muddy boots. He was standing directly behind her car, hands in his pockets, head slightly tilted, like he was amused. Rachel's blood turned to ice. He wasn't smiling anymore, and somehow that was worse. She grabbed the keys, her fingers fumbling to unlock the door. But before she could, he spoke. Hey! His voice was low, casual, but too controlled. Rachel froze, the hairs on her arms standing straight up. I think you dropped something, he said. The air felt wrong. Rachel swallowed hard. Her body was screaming at her to move. She turned her head, just enough to see him out of the corner of her eye. His stance was relaxed, too relaxed. Like he wasn't just some random guy trying to help. Like he was waiting. Rachel forced a tight smile. No, I'm good. Thanks. Her voice came out wrong, too stiff, too high. The man didn't react right away. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Rachel's chest tightened. I'm pretty sure you did, he said. Still calm, still measured. And then, he reached for her. Rachel jerked backward, heart leaping into her throat. Her hand slammed against the car door handle, yanking it open just as the man's fingers brushed against her sleeve. Too close. Too fucking close. She threw herself inside the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just in time. The lock clicked. A second later, the man's hand hit the window. Rachel let out a shaky breath, her entire body trembling. What the hell was happening? She fumbled for the ignition, but her hands were shaking too hard. The man just stood there, watching. His face was unreadable, but his breathing was heavy. Then, his fingers curled into a fist, and he rapped his knuckles lightly against the glass. Like he was knocking. Rachel's breath hitched. Her entire body screamed, "Drive. Get the hell out." But before she could, headlights flashed in her rearview mirror. A second car was pulling in behind her. Rachel's stomach dropped. It was the brown pickup truck, and someone else was inside. The truck inched forward, blocking her in. Her throat went dry. There were two of them. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a creepy guy in a parking lot. This was planned. Rachel slammed her hand against the horn. A loud beep echoed through the parking lot. For the first time, the man outside flinched. Rachel's blood pounded. It worked, but not for long. The brown truck revved its engine. Rachel's mind raced. What do I do? What do I do? She was trapped. She looked left, no way out. She looked right, just rows of parked cars. She looked forward, the open lot. And then she made a split-second decision. Fuck it. She threw the car into drive. Her foot slammed the gas pedal. Tires screamed against the asphalt as the car shot forward. She veered hard right, just barely missing a shopping cart. A loud thud echoed as she clipped the side mirror of another parked car. She didn't care. She kept going. Was it over? Rachel hit the main road doing 60. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was ragged. She checked the mirror. No sign of them. The parking lot faded into the distance. She let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand against her chest. She was okay. She was safe. She reached for her phone, her fingers still trembling, but it wasn't there. Rachel frowned, patting the seat next to her. Nothing. She checked the passenger side floor. Nothing. Her stomach twisted. Where was it? Then, a buzzing sound. Her breath caught. It wasn't coming from inside the car. It was coming from the trunk. A ringtone. And it wasn't hers. Rachel's entire body went cold. There was a phone inside her trunk, and she had no idea how it got there. Rachel's hands trembled against the steering wheel, her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to break free. The road stretched in front of her, dark and endless, the yellow lines blurring under the streetlights. But she wasn't thinking about the road. She wasn't thinking about the speedometer, hovering well over the limit. She wasn't even thinking about the two men she had barely escaped from. All she could hear was the buzzing sound coming from the trunk. A phone. A fucking phone inside her trunk. And it wasn't hers. Her breath hitched, fingers tightening around the wheel. How? How the hell did it get there? She tried to think back, tried to rewind the last hour in her mind, piecing it together like a shattered mirror. The store. The parking lot. The man. Had he? No. No, there was no way he'd gotten to her car before she did. Unless... Rachel's stomach twisted. Had it been there the whole time? A new kind of fear crawled up her spine, colder and sharper than before. Because if the phone was planted before she even left the store, then they had been planning this from the beginning. Rachel's apartment wasn't far, 10, maybe 15 minutes from the Walmart parking lot. She should have felt relief, knowing she was almost home. But she didn't. Every instinct in her body screamed at her that she wasn't safe yet. She flicked her eyes to the rearview mirror. The highway behind her was mostly empty, just a few distant headlights far too far away to be the brown pickup truck. Still, the unease wouldn't leave her. Rachel reached for her phone out of habit, but then remembered. It was gone, and suddenly, she felt naked, disconnected, alone. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to breathe. She just had to get home, lock the doors, call the cops. Everything would be fine. But then, the buzzing started again. Rachel jumped, louder this time. The ringtone was muffled, but unmistakable, vibrating somewhere deep in the trunk. A shiver crawled over her skin. For the first time, she let a terrifying thought take shape in her mind. What if? What if it wasn't just a phone in her trunk? Her throat went dry. What if? No. She slammed on the brakes. Rachel's car jerked to a stop on the side of the road, tires screeching against the pavement. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. She sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. You have to check." Her body screamed at her to just drive home, pretend it wasn't happening, but she couldn't. She wouldn't. Her legs felt heavy as she reached for the door handle, like she was moving underwater. She stepped out into the night. The air was thick, humid. The sound of insects buzzed in the distance, blending with the faint hum of cars passing on the main road far behind her. The buzzing had stopped. Rachel swallowed hard, making her way to the trunk. Her hands shook as she reached for the latch. And then, she hesitated. A horrible thought crashed through her mind. What if someone was inside? Her pulse roared in her ears. She took a deep breath, clenched her jaw, and yanked it open. For a split second, all she saw was darkness. Then, a phone. A cheap, old flip phone, sitting dead center in the trunk like it had been placed there on purpose. Rachel's stomach lurched. No, this isn't right. She reached for it with shaking hands, fingers closing around the cold plastic. The second she picked it up, the screen lit up. An incoming call. Unknown number. Her breath caught, and then it answered itself. A voice, low and smooth, crackled through the speaker. "You should have gotten in the truck." Rachel dropped the phone like it had burned her. It clattered against the pavement, the screen flickering. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. This wasn't random. This wasn't over. This was a game. Her vision blurred with panic as she stumbled back toward her car, slamming the trunk shut so hard the entire vehicle shook. She had to get out of here. Now, she yanked the door open and threw herself inside, locking it instantly. Her fingers fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life. But as she reached for the gear shift, headlights, in the rearview mirror, Rachel's stomach plummeted. A truck, not moving, just sitting there, 100 feet behind her, parked on the side of the road, watching. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. It couldn't be them. It couldn't. But deep down, she knew. They had never stopped following her. Rachel's instincts took over. She slammed the car into drive and sped off. Her tires squealed against the pavement, the car fishtailing before catching traction. In the mirror, the truck's headlights flicked on, and it followed. Rachel's breath came in ragged gasps. She pressed the gas pedal harder, watching the speedometer climb. 60, 70, 80. The truck kept up. It wasn't trying to pass. It wasn't honking. It was just following, like it was waiting. Rachel's vision blurred. She needed help. A gas station, a police station, anywhere with people. She spotted an upcoming exit ramp and jerked the wheel, sending her car veering onto the off-ramp at the last second. For a moment, she thought it worked. For a moment, she thought. The truck didn't follow. Rachel's breath hitched. Had she lost them? Then, a second pair of headlights appeared ahead of her. Not from the highway. From a side road. Another truck. Her chest tightened. This one wasn't just following. It was blocking the road. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She hit the brakes hard. Her tires skidded, the car jerking to a violent stop just feet from the new truck. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then, the driver's door of the truck ahead of her opened. A man stepped out, and Rachel knew. She had never escaped at all. Rachel's entire body locked up. Her fingers gripped the wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white, but she couldn't move. She couldn't even breathe. The second truck was parked directly in front of her, blocking the road, its high beams flooding her windshield with blinding light. And then, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Rachel's stomach twisted into a knot so tight it hurt, because she recognized him. The man from the Walmart aisle. The same orange t-shirt. The same muddy boots. The same cold, empty stare. Rachel's pulse roared in her ears. He wasn't rushing toward her. He wasn't angry or shouting. He was just standing there, his head tilted slightly, like he was watching a trapped animal, waiting for her to realize, waiting for her to break. A sharp, panicked breath hitched in Rachel's throat. She hadn't escaped. She had never escaped. Rachel's body kicked into autopilot. Her foot slammed against the gear shift, jerking the car into reverse. The tires squealed as she slammed the gas. Her car lurched backward, her heart racing so hard she thought she might pass out. She twisted in her seat, glancing behind her, and saw the brown pickup truck, the first one, the one that had been following her since Walmart. It was right behind her, headlights flaring to life. Rachel's vision blurred. No, 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 no. They had boxed her in, planned this. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as she realized there was no way out. The man in the orange t-shirt took another step toward her. The driver of the second truck, another man, got out too. Rachel's chest tightened. There were two of them, and she was alone. Rachel's mind spun wildly, clawing for an escape. She glanced at the road ahead, completely blocked. Behind her, trapped. Her eyes darted to the left, dense forest. To the right, an old gas station. Dark, empty, no cars, no people. Rachel's pulse spiked. Could she make it? It was her only option. Before she could second-guess herself, she moved. Her hand yanked the wheel hard to the right, her foot slamming the gas pedal. The tires shrieked against the pavement, the car jerking violently as she tore across the shoulder, gravel flying behind her. She gunned it toward the gas station lot, praying the pavement wouldn't give way under her tires. For a second, just a second, she thought it worked. She thought, maybe. But then, both trucks moved. Engines roared to life behind her. Rachel's breath caught. They weren't letting her go. Rachel skidded into the empty gas station lot, barely slowing down. She slammed the brakes, threw the car into park, and wrenched the door open, sprinting before she could think. The doors of the trucks slammed shut behind her. Footsteps. Rachel's lungs burned as she ran. She reached the station doors and yanked hard. Locked. Rachel let out a strangled sob. She banged on the glass. Hello? Please. Nothing. The store was dark. Empty. No clerk. No customers. No one. Rachel's head snapped around. The two men were walking toward her. Calm. Slow. They knew. She had nowhere to go. Rachel backed up, pressing herself against the locked door. Her heart pounded so violently that she felt lightheaded. One of the men, the new one, the one from the second truck, pulled something from his pocket. Rachel's chest seized. It was a roll of duct tape. Her stomach turned to ice. This isn't a robbery. This isn't random. This is a kidnapping. And she was the target. Rachel's breath came in quick, ragged gasps. She felt her vision narrowing, the edges of the world blurring, panic crushing down on her. This was it. This was how it happened. The kind of story you see on the news. A missing woman. A grainy security camera photo of her last known location. A cold case that never gets solved. Rachel wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But there was no one here. And the two men, they knew it. Rachel's throat was so tight she thought she might choke on air. Her feet refused to move. Her body felt frozen. And then, a noise. From inside the gas station. Rachel jerked her head around. For the first time, she saw movement inside. A figure. A man. Rachel banged on the glass again. Harder. Help me. The shadowed figure moved closer. Rachel's pulse roared in her ears. Someone was inside. She wasn't alone. She turned back toward the men, but they had stopped. Their expressions shifted. The man in the orange t-shirt tilted his head, eyes narrowing at the gas station window. Rachel's breath hitched. Why did they? And then, the figure inside the gas station stepped into the light. Rachel's blood turned to ice. Because she knew him. She had seen him before. He was the cashier from Walmart. And he was smiling. Rachel felt her stomach drop into nothingness. The cashier. The one who had rung her up. The one who had been right there at checkout. He was with them. Her knees buckled. The world tilted. This wasn't just two men. It was more. This was organized. Planned. A setup. Rachel's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The man inside the gas station unlocked the door. Rachel's entire body screamed at her to run. But where? The men outside hadn't moved. They didn't need to, because she had nowhere left to go. The cashier held the door open, his smile widening. Come inside, he said. And Rachel knew. If she stepped inside that gas station, she was never coming out. Rachel's breath hitched in her throat. The Walmart cashier stood in the doorway of the gas station, his silhouette outlined by the dim glow of the interior lights. His smile was too wide, too practiced, like he'd done this before. Come inside, he said again. Calm, casual. like they were old friends. Rachel's body locked up. Her mind screamed at her. This was the end. The men behind her, the one in the orange t-shirt, the man with the duct tape, they didn't need to move. They had already won. Her vision blurred at the edges, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She had played right into their hands. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was a setup, a machine, a system, and she was the next victim. Rachel's mind raced. The Walmart cashier, the two men, the tracking phone in her trunk. How long had this been happening? How many other women had walked into this exact trap? She thought about the silent parking lot at Walmart, the way it had felt too empty, the way the cashier had barely spoken to her as he rang her up. But was he watching the whole time? Was he signaling to them? Her stomach twisted violently. How many women had stood exactly where she was standing now? How many had walked inside that gas station and never walked out? A cold shudder rolled through her. This wasn't just two men. It wasn't just her bad luck. This was bigger, more organized, more practiced. Rachel's legs threatened to give out. This was a trafficking ring. The man in the orange t-shirt took a step forward. Rachel felt her entire body react, her heart slamming against her ribs, her brain screaming, "Move!" Now, she turned, fast, reckless, and ran. Not toward the gas station, not toward the road, toward the forest. The men shouted behind her, footsteps pounding against the pavement. Rachel ran harder. The moment her feet hit the grass, the ground gave slightly beneath her, uneven and wild. Branches tore at her skin, her dress snagging on thorns, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She could hear them behind her, heavy boots crunching through the brush. Rachel didn't think. She just ran deeper into the trees. The night swallowed her whole. The further she ran, the darker it got. No streetlights, no houses, just endless trees. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she kept moving. She could still hear them, chasing her. Rachel's mind reeled. How far until a road? A house? A car? The sound of branches breaking behind her. Closer now. Too close. She veered left, diving behind a fallen tree, her breath ragged. She pressed herself into the dirt, body trembling. Stay quiet. Stay still. She could hear them, moving, searching. Their voices were too calm. She can't get far. She's gonna wear herself out soon. Rachel's blood ran cold. They weren't worried. They weren't rushing. Because they knew. They had done this before. And that terrified her more than anything. Rachel's head was spinning. She had to do something. She scanned the ground, her fingers shaking. Then, her hand brushed against a rock. Not big, but heavy enough. A weapon. A last resort. Rachel gritted her teeth, gripping the stone. Then, footsteps. Closer. Her entire body tensed. A shadow moved between the trees, just feet away. Rachel coiled, ready to strike. But before she could, something else moved. Behind them, a sound, a branch snapping. The man stopped, turned. Rachel held her breath. And then, a new voice. Deep, rough. "You lost?" Rachel's eyes widened. The man in the orange t-shirt stiffened. Who the hell? He never finished his sentence. The gunshot ripped through the night. Rachel flinched, pressing her hands against her ears. The forest erupted into chaos. Another gunshot. A man yelled in pain. Then, footsteps. Fast, heavy, running. Rachel's chest heaved. She couldn't see, didn't know what was happening. Then, hands grabbed her. She screamed, thrashing, her rock swinging wildly. Hey, it's okay. You're okay." Rachel froze. The voice. Not them. She looked up. A man, older, rugged, with a badge on his belt. A cop. His face was rough, lined with age and exhaustion. "You okay?" he asked, scanning her face. Rachel sucked in a breath. Her lips trembled. And then, she broke. She collapsed into his arms. Her body shook violently, sobs ripping through her chest. The cop held her up, looking around. They gone? Another voice, a second officer, stepping forward from the trees. Rachel barely processed what happened next. More voices. Radios crackling. The sound of sirens in the distance. The men gone. The trucks disappeared. Rachel's mind couldn't catch up. She just kept shaking, kept crying, because she knew. Even though they were gone now, they weren't really gone. Rachel sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She felt numb, cold, distant. A female officer kneeled in front of her, voice soft. "You're safe now." Rachel barely nodded. Her mind was still replaying everything. The Walmart, the cashier, the phone in her trunk, the gas station, the men in the trees, and the one thing that haunted her the most. She turned to the officer. "Did you find them?" The cop's expression faltered. Rachel's stomach twisted. "They got away, didn't they?" she whispered. The officer hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. Rachel felt sick. She clenched her fists, fighting back the burning behind her eyes. Because she knew they weren't finished. They would try again, with someone else, somewhere else. And next time, that girl might not escape.